Step into the shoes of one of the greatest criminal mysteries of all time. D.B. Cooper, the mysterious hijacker who jumped out of a plane with a bag full of cash and was never seen again. Join us as we investigate the evidence, explore the various theories, and delve into the psyche of a man who pulled off the perfect crime. Tonight on Newsworthy, 2 words and 2 question marks.
He's alive!
Have you checked the children?
Get out!
You have scoured the podcast world and finally found us, Newsworthy with Steve and Jerry, where we delve into all things mysterious, macabre, or out of this world, and decide if they are truly newsworthy. 2 words and 2 question marks.
Why should you work with Ed Locke? A better question is, why wouldn't you work with him? He is proud to support an amazing lender, USA Mortgage.
When you work with them, you can expect a home financing experience that is free of hassles and headaches. They have complete control over your loan due to in-house operations such as processing, underwriting, closing, and funding.
USA Mortgage represents a lot of fantastic things, but they are especially thrilled to partner in several community outreach programs, including Habitat for Humanity, Home Sweet Home, Veterans Community Project, and many, many more. They love going to work every day, which means they love working for you. Ed wants to be your lender for life, so reach out to him today and get the journey started.
If you would like more information, please reach out to Ed Locke at area code 502-680-0953, NMLS 448908, USA Mortgage NMLS 227262. USA Mortgage is an equal housing lender. This is not a commitment to lend. Additional terms and conditions may apply. For licensing information, go to www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org.
Hello, Mr. Jerry. How are you?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm very saddened to look over and not see a Brett.
I absolutely agree with you.
Apparently today, Brett was getting his butt hair braided.
Yeah,
and,
we
it
hated
went
that for a couple
long.
of reasons. We hated it for a couple of reasons. Yeah, we hated that it had to happen. We hated that he put more priority in that than he did coming here. So
I know.
it
Terrible.
is what it is.
Well, maybe next week he'll come in and won't have the same issues he did this last week.
Yeah, I mean, if it was something like, a family Christmas party, now that's understandable.
Yeah, if you got
Yes.
family
I mean, come on.
issues, you got something, Christmas, it's holiday season, we'd understand that. But
Absolutely.
a hair appointment, come on. Anywho,
Man.
Jerry, I don't know. I'm a busy guy. I do real estate. I work for
Yes,
the
you are.
nonprofit. We do the podcast. I'm also filming a documentary.
Really?
Yeah, about how to pilot a plane.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
I
filming.
know you're a pilot, but I didn't know you're that far along to be making a documentary.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
we're trying to teach people to fly planes. Right now,
That's good.
we're filming the pilots.
Oh.
Boo! I'll boo my own
like-
joke. That was bad. Boo!
You boo yourself off stage on that one, huh? It wasn't the podcast last week, was it? When you were telling Brett about that I was afraid to fly with you,
No, I
That
think
was just
we
he
were,
and
I
I
don't think we
talking
were
about
on the air. No.
which is not true. I wasn't afraid of you. I was actually had a chance when I was sophomore, junior in college. Had a roommate whose brother was a pilot and had a chance to go up in one of the little small Cessnas. And I was sitting next to George. His name was George Jones. My roommate was Jeff Jones, and I was sitting next to him, and he started it up. It was the first time I'd ever heard one of the little small planes engine. And for those of you that have not heard it, it sounds identical to a Briggs and Stratton 3.5 horsepower. I kid you not. So it had nothing to do with you being the pilot that made me afraid to go up. It was the sound of those engines that those things make.
Here's the thing. When I was training, and Stephanie listens to the podcast, she and Chris Carter listen to both of those guys helped train me.
Right.
They'll tell you at the right before you get on the runway, you before you take the runway to take off, because once you get on the runway, it's yours.
Yep.
Everybody else is in a holding pattern. So you do a few final checks, and one of those is the throttle check.
Okay.
And you're basically just making sure your throttle stick works.
Right.
But I would always rev the engine, like, boom, boom, and it would drive them nuts. I'm like, throttle check, boom, boom.
Yep, I could see that.
Typical boy.
Little boy with a big engine.
Yep, pretty much.
You know,
Because there's no exhaust on those planes.
Right.
That's why they're so loud when they fly. Those little planes, they have a pipe, but it didn't have a muffler on it. It just,
Exactly.
So it sounds.
I mentioned me being afraid to fly in the small planes. That actually is not the only thing that I have a fear of.
Oh,
I don't know if I ever told you, but for the longest time, I had a fear of planting fruit trees.
really?
I did. But I finally grew a pair. Gotta love it when you beat those anxieties.
Kudos to
Like that
you
one.
for saving the dad joke portion of the show this week. That was much needed. You did a good job.
Would have never thought a pear tree would have done that.
So, Jerry, today
Yes.
I am not drinking cold sweet red.
You are not?
I am drinking a Natty Light.
Yes, you are.
And for a very specific reason, I have had the privilege in my life to have not one, but two amazing stepfather-in-laws. My previous father-in-law, Les, passed away yesterday. Yesterday morning early, and he had a short battle with cancer. Great man. I can't speak highly enough of him. Given how our relationship started compared to how our relationship ended, if you will, night and day. He wouldn't let me in his house for the first 6 months I knew him, and I didn't know him. I wasn't allowed in the house.
Yep.
He didn't like the fact I was dating his daughter. In fact, she was coming out of a bad marriage, and in his mind, it was my fault that they weren't together.
And that was not the case.
It wasn't. No,
I worked with you at the time. I know it absolutely was not. But yeah, typical father, very protective.
Very protective. Didn't want anybody else to come in there and hurt her.
Right.
And fair enough. Les was very old school. Loved his wife. Worked hard his whole life. Loved his grandbabies. He would often, even after we split and I gained custody, we always had a great relationship. He would drive from one city to the other every Friday before the boys could drive to come get them and take them home with him for the weekends. And wasn't afraid to have a hard conversation, even if it hurt your feelings. He did it not out of being an ass, but he did it out of love.
Yep.
And everything, if you first saw or heard Les, he could be a little rough around the edges. But once you learned who he was, you knew everything he did was out of passion and out of love. And I can't say enough good things for him. Les, this beer's for you, buddy.
Here's
Rest
to
in
you.
peace.
Absolutely. The first time that I ever met him and his wife was only a few years ago here at your house. It was a 4th of July picnic that you had that they come to. The very fact that your ex-in-laws from at that point, 15 years, no, more,
Yeah,
had to have been more at that point, at least 15 years previous, your former in-laws were coming to your house says a lot about him and you as well. The fact that you guys were able to stay friends for that many years after
Yeah.
the marriage had lasted says a lot to both of you. Yeah. Again, I didn't get to meet him and wasn't around him very much, but seemed like a great guy.
Absolutely. Loved them grandbabies, all of them.
Yep.
So, I'm glad he's with Jesus now, and he didn't have to suffer long, and
Amen.
he was a good man. So
Cancer freaking sucks. Just for
it
what it's worth.
absolutely does. Absolutely does.
It's one thing to take a life, but to do it in such a horrendous, torturous way
Yeah.
that cancer has a way of doing so many times, cancer absolutely sucks.
Yep. Hate it. In fact, I'm going to get that tattooed on me now that I have personal experience with it. Except I think I'm going to do the F cancer
Yeah, there
tattoo.
you go.
Pretty sure that's going to be on my body at some point.
What I was thinking. If I did it, I would
Because
have to
I still
include
have to, we got a whole nother thing yet to come with that. But anywho, let's get into today's topic. Today's topic, I'm stoked for it. I'm really happy. And I was really surprised that you weren't into it or hadn't heard as much about it as I did. I know Brett's really, I can't believe he decided to get his hair braided because he was really excited about this.
His back hair at that.
Yeah, just crazy.
Who gets their back hair braided instead of coming on a podcast?
I know, right? Anywho, so tonight's episode is all about the mysterious, the non-existent, the fake person, if you will, according to everything, D.B. Cooper. If you haven't heard of D.B. Cooper, this story has everything but murder in it, basically.
That it does.
And it has hijacking, it has theft, it has James Bond-esque drinking, it has everything. It's so I don't want. It's out there.
It really is.
It's so brazen.
But it's still factual.
It's so ballsy. Just my guy had like he grew a pair.
Yes, he did. Didn't have to plant a fruit tree to get it either.
No, he did not. So let's talk a little bit about who we're talking about here. So D.B. Cooper, for all intents and purposes, as far as we know, is a made-up name.
Well, first of all, it's not even DB.
Yeah, it's Dan. It was
Dan
supposed
Cooper.
to be Dan Cooper. I don't
And
even
that's
know
a
where the
made-up
B came from.
Well, I can tell you.
Okay.
Let's wait a little bit. I'll wait.
Sure.
It's not an appropriate time to throw that in, but I'll tell you when we get
So
there.
you could read and watch 100 different things and get 100 different facts about D.B. Cooper. There's no way we can do it all here today. I'm going to condense it down and get through the good parts as best we can. But let's just say that for over 50 years now, this is the only unsolved hijacking on the FBI's books, and for good
In the
reason.
United States.
In the United States.
Only one that's happened and has not been solved.
So, D.B. Cooper, and we're pulling from Wikipedia here just a little bit. D.B. Cooper is a media epithet for an unidentified man who hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, which was a Boeing 727 aircraft, on November 24th, Thanksgiving night, 1971, during a flight from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. 30-minute flight. Easy peasy. The hijacker basically got on the plane. He bought a ticket, a one-way ticket, under the name Dan Cooper. Got on the flight, had a briefcase, was wearing sunglasses, nice suit, tie.
Just looked like your typical business.
Typical businessman, mid-40s, about 140, 150, narrow, thin features. Looks like your typical businessman. You
Very
would
much
never give this guy
Second look.
You never give him a second look. Basically, he gets on the plane. He sits there. He orders a drink, a bourbon, and Coke, and hands the stewardess a letter. The stewardess, who's quite accustomed to getting numbers and
From
notes
guys.
from dudes, because
Being hit on.
throws it in her apron and proceeds to go on, and he calls her back over and says, ma'am, you really want to look at that note? I have a bomb. And all hell breaks loose from there. Sort of. Now, the crew handled this professionally to the point that no one else on the entire flight, other than the two stewardesses or flight attendants, which one is the way that's flight attendants today, I guess,
Probably.
and the flight crew even knew. None of the passengers even knew.
Not a single one. Even when they disembarked, still didn't know.
Right. So basically, he hands them a small note, and they immediately let the pilots know. The pilots let Seattle know. Seattle says, get that plane into the ocean. So they divert course. They go over the ocean in case he blows the plane. The plane can't come down and hurt anybody on the ground. The pilots, and here's what he ransomed. Here's what he said. He says, I want $200,000 in small bills. I want 4 parachutes, and I want a refueling truck on the tarmac when we land in Seattle. And to the FBI's credit, they made that happen. They gathered the $200,000 up from all local banks.
How much do you think that would be worth in today's money?
I'm glad you asked.
That was, what, 1971 you said?
1971. Today's money
52
is
years ago.
$1.4 million.
Okay.
A lot of money.
Yes, it was.
So they scurry about. Now, here's the thing that blows me away. And I'm sure the banks have a way of tracking this to make it easier than I'm putting it together in my mind. I got it in my mind. There's some guy going through all the bills, writing down the serial number of every one of them, because they did know the serial number of every bill that they gave him.
I think I read somewhere they were taking maybe 10, 12, stacking them and taking pictures, which they turned into microfiche copy. I think I
That
read
makes
somewhere.
sense. Makes sense. So $200,000. They originally tried to give him 4 military-grade parachutes. D.B. Cooper said, no, I don't want those. I want parachutes that a normal person would use. They gave him 4, 2 backpack type parachutes, 2 front pack parachutes. Back more on that in just a minute.
Sure.
Basically, so the nutshell is they got him that stuff. They tried to stall him while they were on the tarmac. He put all the windows down and said, this is taking too long. We got to go. So off they went. Very shortly after they take off, this particular aircraft, the Boeing 727, had a staircase down the back of the plane. It dropped out of the bottom of it. He dropped the bottom. He asked the stewardess how to operate it, which he had an instruction card, which was kind of an interesting fact. Dropped it down, put the parachutes on, jumped out. No passengers were hurt. He was nothing but cordial to the people, and D.B. Cooper has not been seen since. That's it in a nutshell. Crazy,
Very
right?
much so.
So let's get into some details, because details matter. And
That they do.
this wasn't just some half-cocked, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get away with it. There's a few, in today's world, we're like, how the hell did that even happen? Because there's so many protocols. There's so much that goes on when you're getting on or off a plane, thanks to 9/11, thanks to
To some small part, thanks to D.B. Cooper.
and a lot
Things
of the
changed
part,
after him.
a lot of the plane designs changed after D.B. Cooper and his copycats. The DC-27 or the Boeing 727 didn't last long after this. They fixed it with what they called the Cooper vane, which prevented the staircase from being lowered mid-flight. But they got rid of those planes pretty quick after this.
Which you didn't specifically say it. It was probably pretty obvious, but he knew that this particular plane he was on
Yes.
had this rear stairwell.
Yes, we're going to get into all that. Yeah.
Most of them have it up front, which if you fall
the
out,
side.
if you jump out, you could hit the wings, you could hit the engine, you could hit.
Be
He
sucked through
knew
an
this
engine.
plane had it. He also knew, from what I've read, that it could not be turned off. The ability to lower it could not be turned off from the cockpit.
Right.
These are things, these are very specific pieces of information that the vast majority of people would not have. Again, 1971, it wasn't like he was Googling it to find out either.
Right. And in 1971, you didn't even have to provide a photo ID when you were buying a plane ticket.
You didn't have to give any ID.
None.
You walked up to them and
Handed them some cash.
you give them the $89 or whatever it cost for that flight. Give them the name that you wish them to call you. They handed you a flipping ticket.
Yep. And
Can
we
you
walked on a
imagine?
plane. Today's world, can you
Oh
know?
my goodness.
Now you got to take your shoes off and, have your butt sniffed. And my current father-in-law is a pilot.
Yep.
So he gets to bypass all that for the most part. But for the average traveler, and now they have fast lanes you can go through, I guess, if you travel a lot. But for the average traveler, it's such a hassle, such a pain in the ass to fly.
Absolutely. And it's now to the point for most flights, if it's anywhere in the vicinity, I mean, it might be easier, probably is way easier. But as far as time involved, you could drive a few hundred miles much quicker than you could fly because you have to get there so far in advance.
Right.
Two or
Right.
three
If it's a
hours.
small flight, most people, I don't fly. I'm just not going to. If it, and we live in central Kentucky. If I'm going to Florida, I'm probably driving.
Yeah.
I mean,
Instead of spending, both ends, probably what, 3-4 hours in an airport?
and then $2,000-3,000 on top of it. I'm just not. Sorry, Mike.
The other thing, I'm sure you'll get to it, but the other thing that absolutely blew me away, other than the fact that you could walk up with your $89 cash and a name that you wanted to be called and get a ticket. The other thing is that in 1971, not only could anyone and everyone smoke on an
Oh,
airplane,
absolutely.
there was an ashtray built into the armrest of every seat.
Yeah.
On an enclosed airplane, you are more than welcome to light up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It just blows my mind.
Well, I had a 1969 Buick Riviera,
Okay.
and it just to show you the mentality of the 60s and 70s and how prevalent smoking was. In the back seat, it had in the middle, so you had the back seat, and if you have Google the back seat of a 69 Riviera. It has a what looks to be a speaker place, a place for a speaker. That's not where a speaker goes. That is a duct system to draw cigarette smoke out of the cabin and put it into the trunk of the car.
Oh my goodness.
That was luxury, son. I'm here to tell you. Anyway,
So even then, they knew it was killing people. We needed to get it out, but they were still putting friggin' ashtrays everywhere.
yeah, and every car back then had the cigarette lighter that would, you terrorized your siblings with.
Yep.
But so back to DB Cooper here. So what is a 727? A Boeing 727 had a crew of 6, had a captain, first officer, flight engineer, and 2 to 3 flight attendants. In this particular case, the captain Scott, first officer Radizak, flight engineer Anderson, and the flight attendants was Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffner. Now, Tina Mucklow, there,
There you
I'll
go.
get it out in a second, was the one that had the most interaction with DB Cooper during this whole time. In fact, she said that he was very polite,
Very calm.
never got coarse, never got agitated. The only time his voice ever even wavered was when he was saying, "Okay, it's time to go. This is taking too long. We got to get off the ground."
Later described him as a gentleman.
Gentleman offered her a tip for the drinks he bought. That key, there's some tricks here because Jerry, here in just a little while, you're going to cover some of the known suspects.
Right.
And we each have our idea who we think it is.
We do.
And to me, I'm going to throw up the keys as we go through. The fact that he was offering a tip is a key to me, okay? Anyway, because what are we doing here? We're stealing $1.4 million, right?
Correct.
So tipping would not be something that I think would be on the Anywho, where was we? So anyway, so here's the thing: we get all the passengers. He lets all the passengers leave. All of them.
After he got his
After
demands.
he got what he wanted, they all could leave.
Yep.
He asked for, this is what he asked for: 4 parachutes, non-military, $200,000. He asked for the plane to be refueled, and he asked for food for the crew. Another key point that, this guy's not a dude who's out there to hurt people, if you will. You don't feed people you're about to blow up, in my opinion. So they get that, they take off. It's not even 10 minutes later. Before they take off, he hands another note and gives it to the stewardess to give to the captain. The note simply said, "All right, boys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fly this plane at the slowest speed that it can take and remain airborne with the flaps down." He said, "By my reckoning, that should be about 100 knots or 110 knots or 110 miles an hour. Flaps full down. And
I thought I read he even told him what angle.
10,000. He wanted it to plane at 10,000.
The flaps at 15 degrees.
15 degrees.
Yes.
Yep. Well, you can go 15. Some planes can go 30 now. I don't know if that plane could or not, but you're right. He said 15 degrees.
Which shows what?
It
Quite a
shows
bit
he
of-
knows what the hell he's
He
doing.
had researched. He
Yes.
knew that plane. He knew a lot about it.
He knew that plane could do what we call slow flight for a great long while.
Distance, right?
Now, the flight engineer, or the first officer, sent back over the PM, and he said, we can do that, but there's no way we can get to Mexico, which he was wanting the plane directed to Mexico City.
Where he told him he was headed.
That's where he said he was going. They radioed back, said, with this setup, this configuration of the plane, we don't have enough fuel to get to Mexico City. They decided Reno was the fueling stop.
They
Reno, Nevada.
suggested Reno, and he
Okay,
agreed.
sure. He didn't care. And he
Changed
didn't
the
care
flight
because he then turned to Tina Mucklow and said, "Hey, how do you get these stairs to go down?" And she showed him, and he said, "Thanks, and you might want to go join your folks up in the cockpit."
And no one come back.
She turned to him and she said, can you take that bomb with you? He didn't respond. He was already putting on the parachutes. And here's a quick thing about the parachutes. He asked for 2 front parachutes. Here's one of the things that makes most people think that he was not an overly experienced parachute person or parajumper. One of the parachutes, the front one, was a dummy.
It had
And
been sewn shut.
it had just been sewn shut. It was used to teach people how to pull and what to do when they're pulling the cord. So
I never heard. Did the police knowingly, intentionally do that?
I never heard if that was known or intentional. In none of the reports that I researched did it say that was intentional, because the police went to a local parachute person and picked them up from him. So
Plus, when he asked for 4, it's obvious that at least the ability for him to jump out with some hostages exist.
right,
So you wouldn't think you would want to give the possibility of a fake non-working parachute
right. You wouldn't think.
to a hostage.
Can you imagine?
But
Oh
I
my
agree
gosh.
with you. I researched. I couldn't find where the police knew ahead of time that one of these parachutes was non-functioning.
I think that maybe, here's my thought. I think that they were in such a panic to get this done. It's a 30-minute
been.
flight, and they want it done now. That maybe he just grabbed the wrong one and then realized after the fact.
And again, they went to a private. This wasn't a military base. They
Right.
went to a private place where they parachuted.
Right.
And I'm sure said, "Hey, we need some parachutes."
need
He
four.
handed them to him, and I guess they just took what he gave.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that. So anyway, he grabbed the money, and you even found where they felt the plane lurch a bit when he jumped off the back of the plane.
Absolutely.
Now, in this process, there were 2 military jets that had caught up with the plane. One was above and one was underneath the jet. so that he couldn't see them out the windows. But they never saw him jump.
It was a very dark night.
Very dark, stormy, lightning, rain, 10,000 foot jump into the middle of the forest. Now, all of that to say, here's where the mystery starts. All of that is 100% factual. All of that happened. The conjecture starts with, did he live? Did he make it? Did he die in the fall? Did he pull the chute? Is he buried somewhere? Did a bear eat him? Where's the money? Not $1 in 50, how many ever years
Was spent.
has ever been spent that we are aware of. Not one.
Not one.
However, on the flip side, so that makes you think, well, maybe he didn't make it. However, they didn't find a parachute
Or a body.
or a body
Or money.
or money.
A little bit of money was found a few years later. We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, nothing
But
at the time. Nothing. Nothing.
And when I tell you that there was a massive manhunt launched the very next day, as soon as the weather cleared, would be an understatement. They sent over let me scroll down here to my notes here. So the day after, immediately after, they put planes and helicopters in looking. Of course, the weather again, we're in the middle of the night. The weather is terrible. Not going to see a whole lot. But they had helicopters up. They had already started the search. So due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was kind of difficult. The jet's airspeed was estimated that it was varied. Again, they had to maintain a certain airspeed in the storm to keep it airborne. So that had to change depending on how it was. Environmental conditions along the flight path was terrible. And only Cooper truly knew how long he was in free fall before he pulled the chute. That also means the difference between this 5 miles or this 25 miles over here or where exactly he landed. Neither of the Air Force F-106 pilots saw him jumping, nor did they see their radars detect a deployed parachute, nor did they see a black individual in a black suit jump into the night. Obviously, moonlight would be difficult to see, but they didn't see any. Of course, limited visibility we've covered. It was cloudy. They also didn't see like flashlights or something on the ground.
Yep.
Nothing.
One thing I will mention
Sure, absolutely.
that they knew after a period of time. At roughly 8 o'clock, their logs or whatever tells them is when the cockpit warning light flashed indicating that the staircase had went down.
Right.
At 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. A few months later, they began to try to think and figure out what could have possibly caused that. They were able to verify that it was him jumping. They verified it by putting a 200-pound dummy on the steps and then throwing it off. And according to the flight crew, it had almost identical effects.
Wow.
So at that point, again, not for several months. So as far as the initial searches, didn't really help then. But at that point, a few months later, we knew almost exactly what time, around 8:13 p.m. that he jumped. Again, that wasn't known for a few months. So you're right. Initially, the search area was quite large that we were looking at.
Right. Well, this area is just full of crazy. Maybe you got eaten by Bigfoot.
Could have been. Literally, we don't know.
So, basically, based on the information you just said, they narrowed it down to somewhere on the very southern reaches of the Mount St. Helens area.
Yep.
is kind of where they feel like he landed
At the time.
at the time.
Later, they were able to pinpoint it a little better.
Sure. But we're talking about counties that hundreds of thousands of miles and millions of acres
Quite a
of
large area. Very
wooded, unpopulated,
Rough terrain.
Rough
hard
terrain.
to search.
I'm so torn on whether he made it or not.
Well, see, here's another thing. Remember when you said that he initially told them, I want to go to Mexico.
Yeah.
He obviously had absolutely no intention of going there.
None, not any.
And when they told him, they were in the air when he told them, I want the flaps at 15 degrees. I want an altitude no greater than 10,000 feet. I want a flight speed no greater than 110 knots or whatever it was. They recalculated and said, we got a problem.
Yeah.
According to these criteria you want us to follow, we no longer have the fuel to get to Mexico. So how about we're going to have to refuel somewhere? They suggested Reno. He immediately said, no problem.
Yeah.
Which means a few things. He had no specific area that he planned to jump out of.
No.
He had no one waiting on the ground because he is up in the air and suddenly agrees to a change in flight plan, which they did. They changed and turned and headed towards Reno. And he then jumps out.
Yeah.
So, and
So
he didn't know exactly where he was at. He couldn't have.
And that shows that he didn't have an accomplice down there waiting on him.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, he would have had to encompass thousands of miles.
Sure.
And we just didn't have the kind of, unless you were military, you didn't have that kind of radio walkie-talkie capabilities back then.
Even then, with the change in flight path, I don't know the military had the capability of
Probably
doing
not.
that.
I mean, I don't know. I'm
71.
not military. I would say no.
But it looks like the answer is no. He did. This is a one-man operation.
Yeah. So shortly after the spring thaw in early 1972, and this happened in November 71, in 1972, a team of FBI agents aided by 200 soldiers, from Fort Lewis, along with the United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, civilian volunteers, conducted a thorough search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days. In March, and then another 18 days in April, Electronics Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search a 200-foot lake, or the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. Two local women had stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County, but it was later identified as remains of Barbara Deary, a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered, unfortunately, several weeks before. Ultimately, the extensive search recovery operation uncovered no significant material or evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington to the south. In March of 1972, after another joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines and the Air Force, the FBI, Cooper probably jumped over the town of LaCenter, Washington. That's their best guess. One of the other things that is noticeable or noteworthy in this is when they were coming back into land to get refilled, Cooper looked out the window and said, "That looks like Tacoma." And he was right.
And he knew how many miles away that was from a certain
Seattle.
Air Force base,
Yeah.
McCullough Air Force Base.
So, just another noteworthy thing, because when you're in an airplane, even at 5,000 feet, a town looks different.
Unless you have a lot of experience flying over that area.
Or you see a specific landmark, or if you were to fly over Lexington, Kentucky, if you didn't know that we have a big blue skyscraper and where Commonwealth Field is, it looks like any other mid-sized city.
Sure.
I mean, You know, if you fly over Nashville, you look for the Batman Tower. You know what I'm saying? It's just, you look for landmarks. But if you're just a normal person, and had no experience, it's almost impossible to be able to discern one city
Sure.
from another.
It's not normal for
Yeah.
the average businessman who, flies quite often. They don't.
Maybe. In fact, was it 2019? There was a guy in Cleveland that had a big flat roof on his business, and he painted "Welcome to Detroit" on it, just to mess with the planes, as the passengers as they land,
And that
come
would
in for
work.
land.
You would.
I always thought that was hilarious.
One of them things that makes you say, what the hell?
Right. So anyway, so they think that they probably, like I said, La Center, Washington. The report indicated in 2019, the FBI released another report indicating that about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, a burglary was reported at a small grocery store near Hessen, Washington.
Which is about 10 miles east of La Center.
Right.
Very,
And-
very close.
very close, and it's an unincorporated community, and it's well within the calculated drop zone. The burglar was noted by the FBI to only have taken survival items such as beef jerky and gloves. Ding, 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 ding. See, not only am I building a case for you guys, Jerry doesn't think he survived the fall.
Just,
I do.
we'll
I
get to
think he
that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of evidence that says he probably didn't. There's a lot of evidence that says he did.
did. Yeah.
You mentioned, you may come back to it in a minute, you mentioned the hundreds of soldiers. We had a frick ton of airplanes that flew over, crisscross this entire original area.
On a
It
grid
was huge.
formation. Yeah.
Trying to find, because they initially thought this guy didn't make it. He died.
There's a parachute hung in a tree somewhere with him hung in it.
There was no evidence found. We sent tons of planes up and flew them in crisscross patterns over a grid, trying to figure out where is the parachute. If this guy didn't make it, there should be a parachute somewhere, right?
There should be something somewhere.
It's 52 years later. We've yet to find the parachute.
What we did find in the mid-90s was a hunter found an instruction panel on how to lower some stairs.
And we don't know where it come from.
No idea, but it matches.
Who else would have a placard with information on how to lower the rear stairwell on 727?
On a plane that
That is
hasn't been
long
used in
since
20 years. So let's talk about some of the later developments. So, first of all, in 2016, the FBI announced that this case was going to be suspended, citing the need to focus investigative resources and manpower, obviously, on more important issues than a 40-year-old
45. It had been 45
45-year-old,
years at that point.
case. But let's talk about some of the things that have happened. The one thing that most people think that probably got rid of the rest of any physical evidence was in 1980. Obviously, Mount St. Helens exploded, leveled huge chunks of this particular area. So if there was a parachute that had been buried or covered up or hidden, that's probably gone to that. Let's talk about some forensic evidence. During the forensic search of the aircraft, and they did do this. Now we talked before, they didn't have DNA evidence at the time. They knew it was coming.
They were working on it.
So they had already started saving stuff so that they could test it at a future date. But during their forensic search of the aircraft, they found 4 major pieces of evidence, each with a direct link to the person they thought was D.B. Cooper. They found a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, hair from Cooper's headrest, and eight filter tip Rowley cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray.
That he was observed to be smoking.
Right. 8 cigarettes in 2 hours. He smoked like you used to. Of course, if I was getting ready to do what he did, I'd probably smoke them too, to be honest.
Yep.
So let's see. What's our time looking like here? Oh gosh, we got to hurry this along. So let's hurry this along. They found a clip-on necktie that had, upon very recent studies, showed some very peculiar things that not everyone would have access to have on their necktie. That you had to work at very specific things to be able to get these
had
molecules.
some heavy metals,
Heavy
microscopic heavy metal materials that, you don't pick up walking down the street.
Right. Unless it's kind of like one of those things, unless you work or eat at an Italian place, you're not going to have, basil up in your tie. Same type deal. They found the hair samples, and they have this stuff. However, they have no one to match it to.
Actually, we don't have quite a bit of this. The hair
Right.
samples we lost.
Right. I was getting ready to get that.
Okay,
the hair
sorry.
samples were lost. We lost the cigarette butts.
We lost the cigarette butts.
The one key that we actually saw him use.
And we knew that we had DNA evidence on it.
Right, because it's right off of your lips.
Right.
So, and we lose those. Darn. And in 1980, here's the big one. In 1980, an 8-year-old named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbia River at a beachfront known as Tina Bar, 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and 20 miles southwest of Ariel, Washington. He was raking the sandy riverbank to build a campfire, and he uncovered 3 packets of ransom cash totaling $5,800. The bills had disintegrated from lengthy exposure to the elements, but were still bundled in rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed that the money was indeed portion of the ransom. 2 packets of the $120 bills, 2 packets of $120 bills each, and a third packet of 90, all arranged the same as when given to Cooper.
Same order.
Same exact order.
But
There was 2
you
missing.
said it. No, there's 10 missing.
Yeah.
One packet had 10 bills
Right.
missing.
Right. Of course, the discovery launched new rounds of conjecture. So there's a couple of different hypotheses. One's the free-floating hypothesis that says that this was just floating around in the rivers until it came to a place. It's impossible that wouldn't happen. The rubber bands exposure would have made them break, and the money would have just...
And the money would have been disintegrated.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
It had disintegrated quite a bit, but was still there on a lot of them to be able to get the serial numbers.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened if it was free floating for 8+ years.
Right. So most people think, or not most people, it is believed that it was at least buried either by D.B. Cooper or by time for a bit of time. It was protected from the elements.
Some way, somehow.
And it was done so in a very particular time because some of the allergens that were in the bills only happen at a very specific time of the year in that particular area. So either the water covered it up at that particular time or DB buried it at that particular time, and then it became unburied at some point for him to find. Whoo-wee! So we talked a little bit about the parachutes. One of the front ones was an unusable training chute, but most people think that he probably knew that and was using that to put more money. He ripped the top open and put
He
more
was
money in
pissed because he had asked for a certain type of backpack to hold the money they
Right.
thought. That didn't get delivered, so he had to take one of the bags that a parachute was delivered in, took one parachute and cut some cords and made his own bag.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. The sketches, every single sketch by every person who physically saw him are almost dead on. So there's no question of
They're very similar.
Very similar. They know, and we'll link to the sketches on our podcast here. But Jerry, now it's time to get down to the nitty gritty.
Okay.
Who was D.B. Cooper?
Before we do that,
Okay.
one thing that I thought was really, really interesting, this money that was found in 1980, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
In 1986, get these pop-ups to go away here. In 1986, after protracted negotiations, the recovered bills were divided equally after giving, the FBI kept 14 for evidence.
Right.
The remaining bills were divided equally between Northwest Orient's insurer, who had already paid the money. They had already paid it out. So, not the Northwest airline,
Right. The insurance
who
company.
paid it, but their insurance company who reimbursed them got half of it. The other half went to the 8-year-old kid at the time, Brian Ingram.
Well, good
Now-
for him.
If you, there was, pull up a calculator if you could real quick.
Sure.
$5,800 was found. FBI kept 14. 14 times 20 is 280. So 5,800 minus that, the 280, and then divide that by 2.
Well, that didn't work out well.
Well, 5,800 would be 56 divided by 2, roughly 2,800. So each of them got roughly 1,400.
Yeah.
$1,400. This 8-year-old boy at the time, he wasn't given out for 6 years. $1,400 that he was given in 1986. He sold 15 of those bills, 15 $20 bills, $300, okay, in 2008. So not for another 22 years. But he sold 15 of these $20 bills, $300 worth. He sold them at auction in 2008 for $37,000.
Yeah, I saw that.
At least the little boy who was raking the beach so his family could safely build a campfire and found the money. At least he was able to get some money
Right.
from it. Yeah.
All right. So before you
Suspects.
start with these suspects, I have my suspect.
Okay.
You have your suspect.
I do.
And we're going to go through them. We'll see.
Well, I hope I cover yours.
Oh, I'm
No, I'm not guaranteed. Here's the deal. Between 1971 and 2016, the FBI processed what they said was serious suspects only, more than 1,000 people. They had more than 1,000 serious suspects in this case. Again, that only went to 2016 when it officially became an active case. Obviously, we can't sit here and go through more than 1,000 suspects.
Right.
I decided to limit it to the top 6, I
Okay.
believe.
What do you got?
Uh,
We'll come.
Ted. Right, my computer.
Ted Braden.
Ted Braden is the first one I'm going to talk about. Born in 1928, lived to 2007. He was a Special Forces commando during the Vietnam War. He was a master skydiver and a convicted felon. Let me digress for a second. The information about Mr. Cooper was conflicting when it comes to his ability and his experience as a parachutist.
Yep.
Several of the people said that he took these parachutes and began putting it on like it was a sports jacket, something he did all the time. He had zero questions. He zero time spent looking at it, figuring how it went, how it's supposed to be turned. He knew what he was doing. The very fact that he was willing to jump out over an area where he didn't know exactly where he was at in the middle of the night in a forested area in the middle of November, when at 10,000 feet, they believed that the temperature was roughly 15 degrees above zero, 17 degrees below freezing, in a business suit.
Right.
Originally led them to believe this man died. He had zero chance. Then they started thinking, if he really was that familiar with equipment, if he was that willing to jump out, you combine that with the fact that he was able to look out the airplane and recognize
Right.
the city. He
Right.
was able to tell them how far away it was from a nearby Air Force base. Let
He
them to
knew how
believe
to set-
this guy. He knew
How
about
to
the.
set the plane for slow flight, for proper jump speed.
He knew about the rear
Yeah.
staircase in the 727, which was extremely rare. Vast majority of most planes didn't have it. So when you put all that together, they begin to think this guy probably has some military experience, probably was an experienced parachutist.
Sure.
That was the prevailing thought for many years. Later on, the FBI ended up thinking that's probably not the case. because after talking to hundreds and thousands of people who were very good parachutists, most of them said, I wouldn't begin to dream of doing this. There's no way. In the middle of the night,
Right.
to jump out over a wooded area,
Where you have no idea,
have no idea where you're
how
at.
close you are to the trees.
you're wearing a pair of penny loafers. You have on a business suit. Again, the store, we think that if he did make it, this robbery at this one grocery
Right.
store, one of the things taken was gloves. You would think you'd have the gloves with you. If you were experienced and knew what you're doing. Anyway, I digress. One of the reasons Ted Braden was a suspect, Special Forces Commando during the Vietnam War, a master skydiver, and a convicted felon. He eventually became one of the military's leading parachutists, and his military records list him as having made over 1,100 jumps. During the 1960s, he was a team leader within the MAC VSCOG, a classified commando unit of Green Berets. In December of 66, he deserted his unit in Vietnam. He made his way to the Congo to serve as a mercenary. He was only there for a short time before he was arrested by the CIA. He was brought back to the United States for a court-martial. He deserted.
Mm-hmm.
Was brought back for a court-martial. But despite it having committed what could be a capital offense, they can punish you with death for that.
Yep.
He not only did not receive death, he was given an honorable discharge and was ordered that he could never re-enlist in the military in exchange for his continued secrecy about this MAC-V ESCOG program that
Right.
he was in. At the time of the hijacking, he was a truck driver for Consolidated Freightways, which was headquartered in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland, not far from the suspected drop zone of Ariel. Some of the cons. Guy was considered to be too short. He had the wrong colored eyes, according to different witnesses. So, Mr. Ted Braden, is that one of your highly ranked suspects?
He was highly ranked, yes, but he looks nothing like D.B. Cooper.
He does not.
I don't believe.
When you look at the pictures, he does not. The next gentleman I'm going to talk about is Mr. Dwayne Weber. Lived from 1924 to 1995, was a World War II Army vet who served time in at least 6 prisons between 1945 and 68 for burglary and forgery. When you combine the Army experience with the prison felony experience, I'm sure was part of what led him to be a suspect. But the biggest reason was after he died, his widow Jo claimed that he told her that he was Cooper on it as a deathbed confession. She also says that they went to the area in 1979, roughly 8 years. And also, if you remember, 1979 would be the summer before the money was found.
Right.
She claims that she witnessed him throwing a trash bag in the river just upstream from where the 3 packets of money were found. Now, his fingerprints didn't match any found on the plane. Let me digress for a second. Since we lost the cigarette butts, since he was very meticulous and he left nothing behind other than the tie and the tie tack, we do not have any confirmed fingerprints of his. They do have a ton of fingerprints on the plane, and the FBI never confirmed, but most people believe that the FBI thought was that somewhere on the plane, amongst all these fingerprints they did have, and it was in the several hundreds of number of different fingerprints that they had, that they believed that at least one of those was his. They were not able to, with any one item, say this is his fingerprints. So the FBI would never confirm whether or not they had his fingerprints. They did, although on a few occasions, and this is one, say that his fingerprints didn't match any that they had on record.
Right.
Again, we're not for sure that we actually have Mr. Cooper's fingerprints.
Right.
Furthermore, you talked about the tie. You talked about the fact that DNA was not in existence in 1971. It was a technology that we were researching and working on. Somewhere in late 1990s, early 2000s, it became a reality. The tie was tested and 3 pieces of DNA evidence were found on the tie. That has been assumed to be his DNA, although there's nothing that confirms that this evidence on the tie was his DNA. Maybe he pissed some guy off and someone actually pissed on him. We have no idea if this is his DNA or not, but the FBI thought that it was. With Mr. Dwayne Weber, we know that his DNA does not match the samples that were recovered from the tie. Mr. Dwayne Weber.
He's out.
Okay, he's out. He's not the suspect from either one. Next suspect, Mr. Sheridan Peterson. From 1926 to 2021. He just died a couple of years ago. He was 95 years old.
Now this is not my guy,
Okay.
but
There's some evidence that points there.
there's some evidence that points there, and he kind of looks like him. He's
Little bit.
He's a little fatter, I think, for that particular time.
A little bit.
He's very close, but I don't think he's my guy either.
He served in the Marine Corps during World War II, was later employed as a technical editor at Boeing, based in Seattle. They took an interest in him as a suspect soon after the skydiving because of his experience as a smoke jumper, his love of taking physical risk, as well as what you mentioned, his very similar appearance and age to the Cooper description. Some of the cons were he was not known to be a smoker. Now, if I was getting ready to jump out of an airplane and could possibly die, I feel pretty sure that I could pretty easily take up smoking, even if it was something I'd never done. But again, a con that he was not known to be a smoker. His hairline was considered to be far too receding to match the descriptions that they had, and also the wrong eye color. Were you going to get into the letters and the codes and some of that
No,
pointed to him?
I wasn't, because we were just running out of time.
We are.
Yeah.
Sheridan Peterson,
Not my guy.
not my guy either. Thumbs
He, in
down
fact,
from him.
insisted he was in Nepal during this whole thing.
He did.
Just so you know. And that story never changed, ever.
Next suspect, Kenneth Christensen, a Northwest Airlines flight attendant who had parachuting knowledge. He matches some eyewitness descriptions. In 2003, Lyle Christensen, watching a documentary about the hijacking, believed his late brother Kenneth was Cooper. He notified the film director of his suspicions, apparently hoping that a movie would be made about the case, which just,
Womp, womp,
Yeah.
womp.
you're trying to get some money out of your dead brother. Shame on you.
Shame on you.
He was never considered to be that close of a suspect. His picture favored a little bit. He was not known to have been in the area at the exact time. Ton of information pointing away from it, even though his own brother was saying, I believe this guy did it. Mr. Christensen, your
Nope.
guy? Thumbs
Not
up,
my
thumbs
guy.
down. Okay, I agree. Thumbs down. Next suspect, Mr. Robert Wesley Rackstraw, from 1943 to 2019, was a retired pilot and ex-convict who served on an Army helicopter crew with other units during the Vietnam War. He came to the attention of the task force in February 78, so again, not for a few years, after he was arrested in Iran and deported to the U.S. to face explosives possession, as well as check-kiting charges. Several months later, while released on bail, he attempted to fake his own death by radioing a false Mayday call, and he told controllers that he was bailing out of a rented plane over Monterey Bay, which they later found the plane.
It'd been painted.
Been painted. He just faked his own death. Very little matching evidence with this one. Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant that Mr. Cooper spent the majority of the time with, said that she did not find any similarities between the photo of Rackstraw from the 70s and her recollection of his appearance. Mr. Rackstraw,
Nope.
your guy?
Not my guy. You're running out, Jerry.
You know what? I do not have your guy. You're going to have to go into the. I had to draw a line somewhere. I knew that I was probably going to exceed my length of time.
That's
The
all
next guy that you've already said is not yours is my guy. So
Yeah.
I know that I do not have yours.
Well, I have the information on my guy, so
Okay,
I can,
I'll let you cover that.
All right.
My guy, Mr. Richard McCoy Jr., from 1942 to 1974. He was an Army veteran who served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, first as a demolition expert, later with the Green Berets as a helicopter pilot. After his military service, he became a warrant officer in the Utah National Guard and an avid recreational skydiver. On April the 7th of 72, he staged the best known of the so-called copycat hijackings. We mentioned this a couple of times. Within, I think, a year or two of D.B. Cooper's hijacking, there was 5 or 6 copycat hijackings. People looked and said, hey, this guy was able to pull this stunt and walk away with today's worth, today's money, 1.4 million. Maybe we should give this a try.
Yeah.
And it was tried several times. This gentleman successfully pulled it off.
He did.
He was able to board the
For
United
2 days.
Yeah, for a couple of days, not long. He was able to board the United Airlines Flight 855, again, another Boeing 727 with stairs in the rear. And he did that in Denver, Colorado. He brandished what later proved to be a paperweight that resembled a hand grenade. That was his bomb. He had an unloaded handgun. He demanded again 4 parachutes, and his demands went up $500,000, 2.5 times as much as Mr. Cooper. After getting his money and his parachutes, he ordered the plane back into the air, and he jumped out over Provo, Utah. He was not nearly as smooth as Mr. Cooper. He left several things behind. He left his handwritten hijacking notes, the magazine that he had been reading with his fingerprints all over it. It took him, as you said, 2 days later to find him. Still had the money, the ransom cash on him. He received a 45-year sentence, and he escaped 2 years later. 3 months later, he was tracked down, shot, and killed in a shootout with FBI agents.
Yeah, Virginia Beach.
Yep, Virginia Beach. In their 1991 book, D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, parole officer Bernie Rhodes and former FBI agent Russell Colomane asserted that they had identified McCoy as Cooper. They cited obvious similarities in the 2 hijackings, claims by McCoy family that the tie and the mother of pearl tie clip left on the plane belonged to McCoy, and McCoy's own refusal to admit or even deny that he was Cooper. The FBI agent who killed him said, "When I shot Richard McCoy, I also shot D.B. Cooper at the same time." But there is credible evidence that McCoy was in Las Vegas on the day of the Portland hijacking. There's also credible evidence that he was in Utah the day after having Thanksgiving dinner with his family.
Yep.
We again will link to the pictures, and the pictures is what gets me. There's a picture of Richard McCoy that matches almost to
I'm
a
looking at him.
flippin' T, one of the sketches
I know.
of the suspect.
I know.
I'm
He's not the
talking
guy.
if you were sitting looking at the real guy and drew a picture, it'd be hard to draw a better picture than the composite sketch of Dan Cooper.
Yeah.
But in the effort to be fair, since I missed your guy, please tell us who you think the most likely suspect would be.
So, drum roll, the real
McCoy.
D.B. Cooper is none other than Mr. Joe Lakich. Joe Lakich was born in 1921, died in 2017, was a retired U.S. Army major and Korean War veteran whose daughter Susan Giff was killed less than 2 months before the hijacking as a consequence of a botched hostage negotiation conducted by who? The FBI. The events culminating in the death of Lakich's daughter would be studied by hostage negotiators for decades as an example of what not to do during a hostage situation. He and his wife later sued the FBI, and ultimately an appeals court ruled in their favor, holding the FBI negligent during the hostage negotiation. Lakich would later become a Cooper suspect, in large part due to the revelation that Cooper's tie contained microscopic particles of uncommon metals such as unalloyed titanium. It is speculated that very few people during that era would have had contact with such materials, and that Cooper may have worked in a manufacturing environment on electronics as an engineer or manager when the hijacking occurred. Joe Lakich was working in Nashville as a production supervisor in an electronics capacitor factory and would likely have been exposed to said materials. When Cooper was asked, and I left this part out specifically because I wanted to bring it in here.
Okay.
When asked by the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, why? Because she felt comfortable with him. He was so nice. She asked him, why are you doing this? Do you have a grudge against our airline? And he said, it's not because I have a grudge against your airline. It's just because I have a grudge. Not because of the money, not because of anything.
Do you think anyone's going to sit there and say, just the money?
Listen,
No.
it is believed by some, myself included, that this grudge was Lakitch's anger toward the FBI for their failed efforts at rescuing his daughter less than 2 months earlier. Look, this explains he's employed. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't have to have it, which is why none of the money's ever been found, why he didn't spend it. This was a
But how does this satisfy his grudge?
it's a big FU.
You punished an insurance company. That's the only people you
Yeah,
punished.
but people that are in those throes, they don't realize that they're punishing they're making the FBI for 45 years look like a bunch of dumbasses. I'm just saying. This man died in 2017, and I bet from 1971 till 2017, he smiled a little every day, knowing that he fooled the
I think
FBI.
whoever it was, if he didn't die immediately, of course he'd smiled a lot.
So
The only unsolved plane hijacking, skyjacking to ever occur.
and here's a couple of things. Now, Joe Lakitch looks similar. He does not look as close as your guy, right? We're not going to even try to go there. Your guy looks like the spitting image, but your guy's follow-ups are so sloppy. Your guy's follow-ups are so ridiculous. If it was about the money and you upped it for $500,000, why didn't you spend any of the money to begin with, the early money? Did you
Well, I
think
think he
this
died.
money was going to be different?
I think he probably died. I don't understand why the parachute wasn't found. There's a lot of wooded area out there,
Yeah.
a lot of places to search, but still, you would think sooner or later we would have found a parachute.
Something. I mean, we found a placard for instructions,
On
but
how
no,
to lower the
no big,
stairwell.
huge parachute. Parachutes are not small.
Very large.
It's not something that's easily hidden. You have to make it go away. But I do think that he survived. I think that the burglary was Joe Lakitch making to be able to survive. I do think that D.B. Cooper lived and he buried the money, and that's why the money was still bundled. And I think that he got away with it. I don't think he passed away that night.
At this point, we will probably never know.
No, we will never know. There are people out there who claim on video and TikTok, oh, I know for sure who the person was.
No.
He told me. You don't know.
That's
I'm
someone like the one guy that, with his deceased brother,
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out how to make a buck.
Yeah.
You talked about a lot of people trying to figure it out. If you do decide this is interesting enough to pursue it further, a couple of suggestions. There's something called the Cooper Vortex, if you really like podcast. That podcast is dedicated to this case. The Cooper Vortex, two guys, Darren Schaefer and Russell Colbert. So far, they have done 72 episodes on, my battery's running low. I hope it survives the next few minutes. They have done 72 episodes on this case. Fair to say they know a little bit more than you and I do. We will put up a list of their podcast. There's also a couple of groups. One is the D.B. Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook, 4,400 amateur sleuths who, as their hobby, investigate this case.
Wow.
4,400 people who are actively, not because they're being paid, not because it's their job, as a hobby, they are still investigating this case, trying to figure out who's doing it.
Wow.
CitizenSleuth.com. I don't know if you come across them. There's a ton of evidence and information on their website. You can also, the FBI has a website for the D.B. Cooper hijacking. Ton of information out there.
Crazy.
We have only scratched the surface.
So I'm probably going to jump the gun a bit here, Jerry, but do you think this needs more or less news coverage?
I think the man is dead. At this point, he would be in his mid to late 80s, if the guesses of his age at the time are correct. So he's probably dead, even if he didn't die at the time. The money is probably long since gone, no matter if he buried it or whatever, unless it was, an extremely,
And it's always tainted.
It's always going to be tainted. Yeah, banks and everywhere still looking for those numbers to show up. I think we'll probably never know. So I think it certainly could use more coverage. I don't think it's going to yield any results.
I don't either. I think I'm going to, let's move on with different stuff. It's a great story to talk about. It's wonderful. It's not, I couldn't do a whole podcast for 72 episodes on this one particular issue, but kudos to the guys that do and are trying to get to the bottom of it. But for me, it's a thumbs down. I love this story. I love everything about it. But I don't think it needs more attention unless we have new evidence that is found.
Nothing's going to come of it.
Right. So that's my thought. Hey guys, real quick, Christmas time's coming. So a little fun thing that I'd like to do, and I'm throwing this on Jerry. Jerry's like, what? I've got 3 gift cards that I want to give away. 3. And the way I want to do that is I want to send you a gift card, some business cards for Newsworthy, and a greeting card with mine and Jerry and Brett's personalized greeting for you. And we'll do that to the first 3 people who send us an email at
Newsworthy with Steve and Jerry at gmail.com.
Send us your name and address. You ask whatever, whatever you're comfortable with so we can get the card to you. The first 3 that send us, if you live in a different country, that's fine. The gift cards go worldwide.
Absolutely.
And we would love to be able to send you a personalized greeting for the Christmas season for us. The first 3 people who've listened to our podcast and would think that would be a cool thing to get for Christmas, let us know so we can get that in the mail to you. Otherwise, DB Cooper, a thumbs down. Did you thumbs up or down it?
I would thumbs down.
Thumbs down. 2 thumbs down. And we're going to say Brett would be a thumbs up, but he's not here. He's getting his back hair braided still. Man, that episode is really interesting. And if you'll stick around for us for just a few commercials, we have another great story to tell you.
Hi, this is Ed Locke with USA Mortgage. When it comes to buying a home, the process can be overwhelming and confusing. With so many options, it can be hard to know where to start. That's why it's important to work with a certified mortgage loan originator. I have the knowledge and expertise to guide you through the process and find the best mortgage option for you. I will work with you every step of the way to ensure that you are getting the best deal possible. So if you're looking to purchase or refinance, please reach out to me at 502-680-0953. So don't take on the stress of buying a home alone. Work with me and I will make your dream a reality. Trust the professionals and make your home buying experience a positive one. MLS ID 448908, DAS Acquisition Company, LLC, doing business as USA Mortgage, MLS ID 227262. This is not a commitment to lend. Additional terms and conditions apply. USA Mortgage is equal housing opportunity.
If you want us to review or rate your product on air, if you have suggestions for new episodes, awesome ghost stories, or anything else, please reach out to us. Our email address is newsworthywithsteveandjerry@gmail.com. Our text number is area code 540-709-1318.
And now, back to the story. Tonight's story comes from Science News and Tina Say. We're going to take a new look at Otzi the Iceman's DNA. It reveals that his ancestors weren't who scientists previously thought. Back in 2012, scientists compiled a complete picture of Otzi's genome, and it showed some really curious things. It showed that Otzi is about 5,300 years old. The problem is, other people with steppe ancestry didn't appear on the genetic record in Central Europe until about 4,900 years ago. Otzi is far too old to have that type of ancestry. He has always been an outlier. But the Iceman still has oddities. 90% of Otzi's genetic heritage comes from Neolithic farmers, an unusually high amount compared to that of other Copper Age remains. The Iceman's new genome reveals that he had male pattern baldness, and much darker skin than artist representation suggests. Genes conferring light skin tones didn't become prevalent until 3 to 4,000 years ago, when farmers started eating plant-based diets and didn't get as much vitamin D from fish and meat as hunter-gatherers did. As Otzi and other ancient peoples' DNA illustrates, the skin color genetics took thousands of years to become commonplace in Europe. That means that people that lived in Europe between 40,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago were as dark as the people in Africa, which makes a lot of sense because Africa is where all humans came from. It's what Krauss said. We have always imagined that Europeans became light-skinned much faster, but now it seems, thanks to Otzi, that this actually happened quite late in human history. And Jerry, if you can't see the light,
Be the light.